Hello, this is Praccy, and today I'm going to be doing a review on Warframe, which is a free-to-play game for the PC. You might have seen it on Steam, also coming out on the PS4. It's a game that I've been playing off and on for a little while now, actually, and currently we're up to update 10 out of however many updates they plan to do. It's still apparently in beta, although I don't know if I trust them on that necessarily. So, let's do a review. So, Warframe is a third-person shooter with a distinct focus on online multiplayer, where you will be cooperating with up to 4 players, all playing their own little space ninja, fighting against 3 separate factions of enemy, which all have their own unique fighting style. The types of missions that you're going to be expected to undertake include extermination, where you kill everything on a level, assassination, where you kill a specific target, rescuing hostages, where you do exactly what it sounds like you do, delivering payloads, and defense missions. The defense missions in particular I'll be going into later, as they constitute a large part of what I suppose is the end game. Firstly, I want to have a talk about the graphics, which is something that I seem to want to get out of the way at the start of all my reviews at the moment. I think the graphics are pretty good, especially when you consider that Warframe is a free-to-play game. Typically I have quite low expectations for free-to-play games, not only in the graphical department but just about every department. And with Warframe I think they've done better than most people would expect. All the environments look pretty good. It's got a sort of Unreal Engine kind of vibe to it. I don't know what engine it's actually on. I think it might be some sort of custom engine, but it looks pretty good. The environments are all nicely rendered. The enemies are all pretty good looking, all quite varied. Nice physics effects. There's a special NVIDIA PhysX option somewhere in there for if you have an NVIDIA card of a correct generation, presumably. And it seems to run pretty well. I have a friend who has a fairly bad laptop, and he could play Warframe on that laptop without any huge problems. He did okay with it. I think he may have had slowed down every so often, but he could run it, which was a big thing for him because he could barely run Dota 2. Then again, this is quite subjective. I mean, who knows really? At least it's free to play, so if you're worried about that, you can try it before you buy it, because you'll never have to buy it, technically. So, getting back to the gameplay, as I mentioned, it's quite a fast-paced game, and it's intended to be played multiplayer with up to 4 players. Although you can play it solo, and in fact I prefer to play it solo because then there aren't people around to slow me down. With the game being free to play, I found that the standard of player that you find in typical public games is rather bad. So if you want to be playing to a top level in Warframe, then you would probably want to join a clan, which is something that I've done, although frankly I still prefer playing solo. The gameplay itself consists of moving through environments with enemies shooting at you and you shooting back, as you would expect from a third-person shooter, as you move towards your objective. Now, there's a slight problem in that certain missions are somewhat ill-designed, in that it is best to rush to the objective and then rush to the end and ignore all the enemies along the way. In fact, that is the most optimal way to do it, and I kind of enjoy that because the movement mechanics do feel rather fluid, but there are some glaring problems with that, even though I do enjoy it, and I think Digital Extremes need to take a little look at that and whether they want it to be part of the main experience of Warframe, which it could be, but it needs to be a little bit more incorporated if that is the intention, I think. A similar thing needs to be said about the stealth aspect as well, which is an intended feature of the game but isn't really implemented yet. Stealth is only stealth in the sense that enemies don't see you yet, and as soon as they do they will run off to trigger an alarm, and for the rest of the level you will have enemies running into you constantly. The stealth mechanics don't really work particularly well. You can perform some sort of an animated kill on something from behind with your melee weapon, but the game is clearly not intended to be played in stealth, at least not yet. Also, I talked about the mission types earlier, and there tends to be a slightly heavier emphasis on defense missions, the mobile defense missions and the normal defense missions, because they give the most amount of affinity points for your time usually, but they also give rewards that you won't find in other modes, and typically they are, I suppose, the only real end game of Warframe, short of special areas unlocked through items that you will usually find in these defense missions. To be fair, I think the lack of a clear end game is probably one of the major stumbling blocks of Warframe in general, and it hurts the gameplay because you don't really feel that there is much goal to the game apart from trying to collect every Warframe and all the weapons that you can get your hands on. Apart from that, there is little to achieve. But on the plus side, the equipment and the gear that you find in Warframe is varied enough that it tends to be fun to experiment with different Warframes and different combinations of weapons. The Warframes act a little bit like champions in League of Legends or in Dota 2, in that they have 4 abilities each, and some of them tend to be a little bit more generic, but a couple of them tend to be more specific to that Warframe. And even though all the Warframes handle more or less the same, these abilities tend to set them apart. For example, my favourite Warframe is the Banshee, and she has a fairly generic damage dealing single target ability, which is mostly ignored, a special sonar ability which shows up enemies on the radar and gives you bonus damage to them if you shoot them in certain places, a silence ability which doesn't really work very well and is obviously intended to be used with the somewhat uncompleted stealth gameplay, and a fairly generic large range area of effects damaging ability which I like to spam the hell out of. There are other Warframes which focus a little bit more around stealth, like Ashe and Loki. Ashe has, again, a single target damaging ability, a stealth ability, an ability that helps him move around, and a area of effect damaging ability. So they tend to follow a fairly similar formula with a few little tweaks. There are a few different general types of Warframes, usually focused fairly around damage, but there's one that focuses more on healing. There are ones that specialise more in damage and area of effect, a little bit like the Banshee and the Nova, and there are ones which focus more on distraction, like Loki and maybe Saren, I guess. All in all, I would say the characterization between the Warframes gives you enough incentive to keep collecting them at least. There's a similar deal going on with the weapons in that they are fairly varied, more or less across the spectrum that you would expect for any shooter, but it does a good job of filling in all the little niche roles that you would expect from shooters. The rocket launcher type weapons, there's the flamethrower type weapons, there's the normal assault rifle hit scanny type weapons, there's the weapons that are more like throwing weapons. So they've got a good variation going on there. Of course, some are more useful than others, to a ridiculous extent. In fact, probably about 80% of the weapons, if you're min-maxing, technically aren't really worth using, but they look nice, and for the most part the game is easy enough that if you really do prefer a weapon that isn't top tier, you could probably get away with using it, except for in a few cases. The interesting thing about gear in Warframe is that its power is determined by the mods that you put into it. Mods are picked up during gameplay, and they each have a special attribute that they will increase when you equip them to a weapon, such as like damage percentage, elemental damage percentage, or you can equip ones to your Warframe which will increase your health and your shields and other things like that. Also, when you start picking up duplicate mods or mods that you don't particularly want to use, you can combine them into mods that you do want, which will level them up and increase their power in whatever field they say that they're going to be helping you out in. In fact, this will end up being quite expensive for you as the game goes on, seeing as getting to a high level of certain mods can cost you millions of the in-game credit currency, separate from the paid-for currency that they use in the free-to-play model. So you've got yourself a Warframe, and you've got yourself a few weapons. What are you going to do with it? Well, when you go into missions and you complete them, you'll see that you've earned Affinity Points at the end. And Affinity Points are basically experience points. You can level a Warframe or a weapon or anything else up to level 30, which is the maximum, which means that you would have 30 mod slots. So when you go to equip mods, you can equip mods up to 30 points in total across all the mods. All the mods have different values as to how much they cost to equip, so that's how that works. Things like shields and whatnot are things that you're going to probably need, and they can run up to quite high costs. Again, with weapons, just raw damage percent is something that you're probably going to want on your weapon, and that can run up to quite a bit as well. But there are techniques in reducing the cost involved in equipping them to your weapons. The first of which is the Polarity System, whereby gear has polarity slots in it, and if you equip a mod with the correct polarity into that slot, it will reduce the mod cost. Also, if you equip a mod with an incorrect polarity, it will increase the mod cost, and this tends to make gear have a sort of specific build depending upon which polarity slots are available to it. The second way to squeeze more mod slots out of your gear is to supercharge your Warframe or your weapon or whatever it is that you're wanting to use, which means that you will get double the mod slots. And this is where the free-to-play element comes in, because the item required to do this is typically bought through the marketplace. You can get them semi-rarely through timed intervals at events and things like that, but it is generally intended that most players will be presumably buying some of these items from the marketplace. So if you want to be competitive with your weapons or your Warframes, you will probably need this, since doubling the amount of mod slots that you can have is equivalent to doubling the power of that item. And it should become the standard for the gear that you intend to use frequently. This brings me neatly on to talking about the free-to-play element. I don't think Digital Extremes, which is the company that makes Warframe, really know what they're doing with the pricing when it comes to the marketplace. You buy in-game currency called Platinum with real money, and then you can spend that on the marketplace. The problem is, Platinum is very expensive compared to other free-to-play games, and items in the marketplace when it comes to Platinum are also very expensive. The only real plus is that if you buy weapons or Warframes from the marketplace, they come supercharged, so you don't need to buy that little extra item that is, I suppose, the standard for wanting to use a weapon at high level regularly. One thing that can help with this slightly is every day you log in, you get a reward dependent on how many days in a row you've logged into Warframe, and usually it's fairly useless things like pistol experience points or a blueprint for an item that you already have, but occasionally you'll get a voucher for a discount on Platinum, which can be quite large, from about 20% to 50%. I think it might even be a little bit more than 50%, but I've definitely seen 20% and 50%, and these vouchers do a good job of tricking you into buying their currency. I would know because I've fallen for it at least once. I think that probably sums things up well enough, so I'll have a little talk about exactly what I do and don't like about the game personally. I'm always quite impressed with the graphics on Warframe whenever I go into it. For a free-to-play game, I think the graphics are above and beyond what you would expect to see, and the optimization seems to be fairly well done, which is something that you also don't often see with a lot of games nowadays. However, it is worth noting that this is just my personal experience, and your mileage may vary in regards to that sort of thing. Also, I'm quite a fan of the way that you can pick up and play Warframe. Each mission tends to last about 5 or 10 minutes, and if you're speedrunning it, possibly even less than 5 minutes. and I like that. It's not too much of a commitment in time to say I'm going to play a little bit of Warframe, unlike other games that have been coming out recently, whereby if you want to play it, you need to sit down for at least half an hour to just get through one game even. Something that I didn't already mention is that Digital Extremes like to run special events in Warframe, which usually come at, I'd say, roughly monthly intervals, but it's never particularly timed out to any schedule, I don't think. And in these events, you usually do special missions or something like that, some sort of little special twist on whatever missions they usually have, and you can get unique rewards for it, which offers incentive for players to come back and play these events. And I like that quite a bit. The events are perhaps the most fun part of Warframe, especially if you're in a clan. Finally, the game is still in beta, which means that you should expect to see steady development with more features and content being added. And to their credit, the developer has been rather good about stuff like that so far. Now on to some of the things I don't particularly like about Warframe. First, and perhaps most heinously, is the fact that games are hosted peer-to-peer. That kind of causes a lot of problems with lag. There is an option somewhere to limit the matchmaking latency values so that you don't get matched into games that lag too much, but the problem is that limits the pool of games that you can even join in the first place. So sometimes it's not an ideal scenario, especially if it's late at night when I usually play it. So you often find yourself hosting games hoping that people are going to join. The lag does really make the game unplayable as well. It's not like a little bit annoying. Doors sometimes don't open, sometimes you don't even load in as the correct Warframe. You load in as the default Excalibur Warframe and you sit there unable to move for ages until you sit there long enough that it does load in and you play the laggiest game ever, or you have to leave because it's really not playable at all. One of my niggling little problems that I have with the game is fighting against Infested, which is one of the factions that you fight against in the game. The Corpus and the Grineer, you fight against them in a very similar way. They just shoot at you from range, and for the most part there is at least some element of positioning involved in that, whereas the Infested just run at you straight like zombies, which is very much the way that they were designed. And some people might like that, but I don't particularly like it because it removes a lot of the elements of gunplay, and I just find it a little bit boring, unfortunately. Another huge problem is the fact that there is a distinct lack of an end game in Warframe. Once you've collected all the weapons and all the Warframes that you were interested in, there's not really very much to do apart from collect more weapons and Warframes outside of the range that you were initially interested in the first place, which makes you kind of think, why am I even bothering to do this, you know? And that does contribute to the game becoming quite a huge grind when all you can really do to progress yourself is to collect weapons. And I would say that even though there is a fair bit of grind involved in getting these new weapons and Warframes, it's not really that much compared to some MMOs out there, but it does feel somewhat out of place in a game that is going for a fast-paced action style to the gameplay. Finally, whatever plan that Digital Extremes seem to have for the marketplace regarding the free-to-play model and buying the currency of platinum doesn't really seem that coherent. The pricing is a bit all over the place, and in general I would almost advise that you don't even buy platinum. It kind of spoils the game. All that you're going to do if you buy platinum is you'll buy the weapons and the items that you want, and then you won't have anything much to do with them apart from use them to get weapons and Warframes that you don't particularly want. So I would steer clear of that if I were you, and even though I have bought platinum, for the most part it is just kind of sitting there, not really doing something, with me hoping that maybe one day they will release something that I want to buy that I can't easily obtain through just playing the game at this point.
I'm detecting no functioning corpus on board. Get to extraction.
We've got robots inbound.
So, would I recommend Warframe? The answer is yes, but only because it's free to play. If this game were a full price retail game, I would not recommend it, mainly because of the issues to do with the repetitiveness of the gameplay after you've played it for long enough, and the fact that there isn't too much direction in terms of an end game at the moment. If I had to give it a score, which I don't, but I will anyway, I would give it a 6 out of 10, probably a quite high 6 out of 10, citing the reasons that I just mentioned. So, that sums up my thoughts and my review on Warframe. I hope somebody found this useful. This has already gone on far too long, so thank you, and I'll see you next time.